So let's face it, our hair quality is often a reflection of what's going on the inside. So what if I told you that your hair follicle was the last thing to get nourished and it's very sensitive to hormonal shifting? No wonder we're seeing challenges with hair shedding, hair breaking, hair thinning, and just general poor hair quality. You know, we don't have to have the issue of balding before it's a problem for us. If it's a problem for you, it's a problem, and we need to be listening. I'm Kelly Engelmann. I'm your host for The Root Cause of Hair Loss, where I'm going to dig into a mini series on all the reasons why we might have hair loss and all the technology that we have today to correct the problem. And then really talk about some foundational things, right? I mentioned what's going on the inside. What's going on the inside really does matter. And today I get to have with me my very best friend, my business partner, my co-host on the Synergy podcast. And honestly, today she's just serving as my security blanket as I kick off this podcast series on root cause hair loss. But she has a tremendous story about hair. I have a tremendous story about hair loss. I mean, you wouldn't know looking at me today, but we're going to talk about our stories. We're going to talk about why we're passionate about taking care of you guys. And hair is just a big part of our identity. It's a big part of who we are. And so thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate your time today. I know how precious it is. And I couldn't think of a better person that I wanted to help me kick off this series. So thank you.
Oh, well, I'm excited too to be able to be alongside of you for this inaugural kickoff. It's a pleasure. It's an honor. I hope that I can, through my story, open up other listeners to just the hope that exists in, like you said, it doesn't have to be a big problem to be a problem.
Right.
If it's a problem for you, it's a problem. And so glad. Thanks for inviting me today.
Yeah. So why don't you take time to share your story with what you experienced with your hair to our listeners and just shed some insight on that.
So, I was thinking about, because you did so good in kind of giving me an idea of where you wanted to go around hair. And I got to thinking about my stories. When does our story begin about our hair, right?
Yeah.
I was that blonde, thin kid. I had really, really thin hair growing up, and my hair was my hair. I never really thought about my hair, until I was diagnosed with cancer in 2019 and didn't have any of the typical treatments. Thankfully, I did not need to have chemotherapy, but I did have multiple surgeries. And we know the role that anesthesia plays. And after walking through those multiple surgeries and such, my hair changed in texture. It was much more curly, a little bit more hard, if you will.
Right.
It just didn't lay the way. My calyx became bigger issues. It wasn't behaving the way that I wanted to behave. And I just felt like that was the diagnosis, right? And so I kind of got okay with the fact that that's how it was going to be. And just shortly after that, COVID hit, right? So COVID hit, and that was a time of high stress. I'm certain that no one on here listening today would relate to that. A very high stress time. And during that time, there was a progression of a shedding of my hair that became more than what I thought was normal, right? So then what do? I'm a practitioner. I have all the answers.
Of course.
Right? But I start running down all of, did my hair care products change? Did my brush change? Did my heat, the amount of heat to my hair? Long story short, I tried everything, to change it, and my hair would continue to shed. And in that process, I was blessed to have someone who when I did have hair treatments like color placed on my hair, I had been with the same beautician for many, many years who could come alongside of me. She knew what my baseline was, right? So that whole assessment, and she would bring to me kind of like, I noticed it changing too, try this, do this. Nothing was working. Long story short, you and I have many conversations on our amazing walk, and You introduced me to different products and Kez, who we had the joy of and the privilege of being able to interview around hair. And
Yeah, so we
you
interviewed
know,
Kez. Yeah, we interviewed her August of 2023. So I would encourage you guys to go back to that podcast because it was amazing. It is not on video, it's just audio only, but I will make sure we put that in the show notes today because it was really good talking about hair quality and just the different things we do to help our hair and the things that we do that don't help. She's a hairstylist here in Mississippi at Noggins, and she's amazing. So yeah, so you met Kez. I was bringing you product. I think every time we met up for a conference or something like that, I was bringing you things
yeah,
that I thought would help, right?
I did. There was improvement, and other times, there was, it was almost like this ebb and flow, or this time period that I would walk through that was better and less. And anyway, in that process, I did end up changing who I was going to, and started changing the products that were lightening my hair, which did help along the way. And then, one trip to Mississippi, and you were like, I have this new product and this new procedure that I would love for you to try. And honestly, it was probably on top of all of the work I had been doing.
Right.
It was the one thing for me, which is the Derive
Right.
product
And
and
that's
the
plant
treatment.
derived stem cell. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But yes, that was a revolutionary treatment that we had or have.
And I got blessed with being able to come to Mississippi and have that done. And I will never forget because you and I, one of our favorite stores, probably shouldn't say that. But, we love Lulu, right? So we do our usual trip to Lulu.
It's not
And
a
I
trip
will
to
never
Mississippi without going to Lululemon with Lori. That's like an epic event
exactly.
for us. So yes, we were in Lululemon.
Yes. And I remember you had already checked out and you were outside, and I was standing in the line just waiting. And the lady behind me said, I just want you to know how beautiful your hair is. And honestly, I got a little choked up about it because to me, I had been walking through because, your hair, when you are losing hair, it is a very emotional thing.
Yes.
It's a very emotional thing, particularly, and I don't know this to be for men, but I know for me as a woman, it's my hair. The fear of, am I going to lose more? How thin is it going to get?
Sure.
Like, what is it going to look like? And she just looked at me and she said, your hair is so beautiful. Mind you, I had just had that procedure the day before. And already I had told you the texture is different. It's
Yes.
just different. And I left out of there that day really hopeful. The weeks and the months that came behind, the lady that I was seeing here to do my hair, she's so funny now, but even when I have it colored less often, but when I do have it colored, she's chasing after these little tiny areas of hair growth. And she's just laughing. Now they're getting longer and longer. You might even be able to see them
Yes.
now, but they're
Your hair
starting to
does
lay
look
down.
amazing, by the way. It really, really does. Yeah, it looks
Thank
really,
you.
really good.
So yeah.
So
So
you had
it's
some
been a
major,
long journey.
in your story, there were some major challenges, right? You had anesthesia, you had hormonal
Mhm.
shifting, right? With your cancer
Sure.
journey, and then you had
Yeah.
stress, right? So as I
Yeah. And then
mentioned,
layer that on top of hypothyroidism,
yeah,
having a thyroid, right? Which
sure.
was another insult to injury.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned earlier, nutrition plays a big part, hormonal shifting, and with stress comes major hormone shifting that will affect that hair follicle and make that follicle become smaller. And so when you're growing the hair back, maybe the hair's thinner, it doesn't cooperate as much, the texture changes. And so it's just fun. I love, love, love working with patients when we do see such an amazing result and getting their confidence back with their hair. Because I'm like Lori, my hair was kind of my thing. When I was small, younger, back in the 80s, I had hair that was 3 times the size of my head. And I spent a lot of time having my hair thinned and tamed and straightened and all the things. We didn't have the tools that we have today with straighteners. So it was a lot of chemical processing on all the things to make it lay down flat because it was so big. And so when I first started having hair loss was after childbirth. And it was actually a blessing. I shed for about 6 to 8 weeks after each child. It was no big deal. It was self-limiting and it made my hair more manageable. And so I never complained about that. I never thought that was a bad thing. And then fast forward to about 12 years ago, and I was going through some incredible stress. working way too much and probably being exposed to things I didn't need to be exposed to, water damage in my prior office. And I started having shedding. And the shedding after 6 to 8 weeks didn't stop. And it was just like continual. And I was noticing that my ponytail size was getting smaller. And Lori and I were going to a conference, A4M, and I stumbled upon a booth that had red light therapy. And so that was one of the first things I implemented in my practice was red light therapy. It's a standalone red light that we would use with the practice. So I started using that. And I did notice with the red light that my shedding stopped, which was great because that was a big issue. I wanted to keep what I had. But it grew a little bit more, but not robustly. And so I think a few conferences later, we stumbled upon PRP, which is platelet-rich plasma. And that's where we take your blood, we get the growth factors off, and we inject it back to the tissue. And that was great. It gave me a great response, but it was very, very painful. So I did that every month for like 3 months, gritting my teeth. Lori did it for me. So, she was my provider doing my PRP, and I was a baby. I was a big baby, but I did it. And so I did that for a while, 3 months, once a month for 3 months, and then every 6 months, and then maybe once a year after that. But every time I did it, I was like, oh, that is so painful. And so when the rep walked through my door with Derive, the plant-derived stem cells, I was like, okay, I need to have this because if I can give this to women and men without pain, what a joy that is. And it's been just revolutionary in the treatment of hair loss in the practice. And so I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're listening. I mentioned in the first part of this podcast, though, that your hair changes are a reflection of what's going on the inside, right? And so we don't want to ignore what's going on the inside. And so anytime we implement a procedure like that, I want to make sure we're taking care of business in the front of the house too. And so Lori's a clinician. She sees patients every day. What are you seeing in your practice as far as hair loss? Are you seeing people coming in complaining of hair loss now more than you did, say, 5 years ago?
Yeah, Kelly, we are. I think that one of the things that we saw significantly through COVID was hair loss, significantly through hair loss. It was almost as if, again, pervasive, right? We're seeing it more and more and more. And the degree and the length of time that they're losing, I think most women will admit to the fact that they have had shedding before, to your point.
Yeah, and shedding's normal, right?
Right. Differentiating, though, really hard for them to differentiate is what is normal, what is excessive, right? And then how long should that last?
So let's talk a little bit about that. Yeah, so we should lose about 100 hair a day, right? Just normal shedding is about 100 a day. We shouldn't worry if it's like that. And our hair, there's 3 different phases of growth. And not all of our hair follicle are in the same phase at the same time. Thank goodness. Or we would lose all of our hair at one time, right? And so, but sometimes we'll get stuck in the telogen phase. And the telogen phase is the resting phase of the hair. And usually that's going to last 6 to 8 weeks. And that's typically what we see post-surgery or post-childbirth. It's like it goes into telogen phase for 6 to 8 weeks. And it kind of, it'll do more shedding than normal. But it should kind of snap out of that. And so what we're seeing now is people are not snapping out of that telogen effluvium, where they just get stuck in that telogen phase for a prolonged period of time, and they're losing more hair. And then the hair that they're growing back, especially if their nutrition and hormones aren't balanced, we'll see that hair that they're growing back be a different texture and oftentimes very thin.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up because it is really important to make sure that through testing, people really understand where are their nutritional deficiencies, what is going on with their overall body chemistry, their body overall health, and how does that relate to the hair. And I think you opened up saying that, your hair follicle is so starving for nutrients.
Yes.
Yet the way we live is so nutrient poor. So what kind of testing do you feel, Kelly, in your clinic is so necessary to make sure that whatever procedure and whatever treatment modality you use for your patients, that they're set up for success?
Yeah, I do believe in an individualized treatment plan, right? And so depending on where they're coming into me, what they're complaining of other than hair loss, oftentimes the complaints are, my gut doesn't feel right. I'm having bloating after I eat. Maybe I'm constipated. I've got brain fog and I'm fatigued and I have hair loss, right? That's kind of those go well together. I see those a lot together. And so what I'm looking for at that point is nutrient deficiencies and hormones and gut microbiome. So typically I'll do
Yeah.
blood testing looking at specific nutrients like vitamin D, ferritin, B12. I'll be looking at what is going on in the gut microbiome. I may have them do a stool test to see what's going on there. And then looking at their hormones. So whether they're male or female, different stage of life will dictate how I assess their hormones because that's a really important part. And then the discussion about stress. We can do all the
Of
procedures in
course.
the world. We can change the diet, as much as we want to. But
Yeah.
if we don't deal with kind of the drivers of stress, and, as my job as a clinician is to figure out the physical stressors, and I can help you navigate the physical stressors like poor blood sugar control, anemia, gut dysbiosis. I'm really good at helping you navigate those. But those situational stressors or the schedule stressors or the lack of sleep stressors are things that lifestyle is just going to have to shift in order to make a long-term impact, right?
Yep. And I love how, even as you were listing the symptoms that a person was complaining of, and then at the very one, and it is, oh, by the way, and that is oftentimes in my practice is how hair loss comes up. And oh, by the
Oh,
way,
by the
I'm
way.
having,
Yeah. So why do you think that is? Why do
and
you think it's an oh, by the way?
because I think that we minimize that either because we accept it as just the status quo, that's what we expect, or why am I really worried about that because these are a bigger deal over here,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
So I think we may, I mean, that's, what do you think?
I think sometimes they've been dismissed by their,
Yeah.
providers. Maybe they have been in and complained about hair loss and they're like, oh, your thyroid's fine. That was another thing that I do check is thyroid. But because that's what everybody thinks is their thyroid is off if their hair's falling out. But your thyroid's fine,
Yeah.
you'll be fine. And so I think they
Yeah.
think they've already checked the box for what's causing my hair loss. They don't realize how many different things can contribute to hair loss. And they don't realize how much power they have over correcting it, right? All the things that we could be doing to help correct. And there are some great products on the market. You mentioned, your hair products that you got that really helped with just the nourishment of the hair itself, right? We used to think hair was dead. It's not dead. And it's full of protein, and we need those good quality proteins on the inside of what we eat, but also topically too. And it's important what we're putting on our hair. We don't want to be putting on our hair products that contain chemicals that are going to damage our hormones. So we can get into a vicious cycle of that utilization too.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I truly believe one of the things that you had said earlier about your hair being kind of if you will, a telltale sign of
Yeah.
what's going on in the inside is I think oftentimes we see our skin as that, but we don't think of our hair as that. And our
Yeah.
hair absolutely is a beacon. It speaks volumes.
Sure. When we think about priorities of like food sources to feed the hair, what I mentioned protein. Is there anything else that comes to mind for like what foods could people be eating to help with hair quality?
Yeah. So I think of anything that increases B vitamins
Mm-hmm.
very much for hair, biotin. I know that anything that helps control blood sugar better
Yeah.
is going to improve biotin and your Bs because oftentimes when we are so blood sugar dysregulated, our nutrients are being utilized over time, and that leads to a reduction in them.
That's right.
So
That's right.
eating protein regularly, so the timing of your food is super important too. I think about things like even oils.
Yeah, I was thinking about oils too. Yeah.
How important that is.
So
I mean,
for the
we grew up in
lusciousness of the hair, right? The suppleness of the hair, we really need those quality oils in our diet. And oftentimes we think about fat in a bad light. Fat is bad,
yes.
right? So we're not thinking about the good quality fats that we could be getting in, like your walnuts,
Yep.
your avocado, the
Yeah.
olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, putting that over some vegetables. All those things can be really helpful in reestablishing a healthy follicle. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And, making sure that the way in which we present to mealtime, right? So we could be eating the most robust, nutrient-dense diet, but not digesting it very well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about what we eat, it's how we eat it. It's how we arrive at the table, hopefully sitting down to eat, which is very uncommon or less
Yes.
common these
Yes.
days to really calm down. I think about even the role that our healthy gut microbiome and good quality probiotics and good bacteria, right, that are
Right.
necessary for good, even nutrient
And they're
levels.
actually
Those types of
studying a few strains of probiotics that are specific for the hair follicle, which I think is fascinating. I think there's more to come on that. I think we're still learning about the microbiome in general, not just the gut microbiome, but our skin and our hair, our scalp has a microbiome too. And so I think
yeah.
more to come on that. And we're certainly in this for the long game as far as learning and bringing to you guys all the new tools, tips, and technology. So when we think about treating the scalp, I mentioned red light therapy. We're going to have a guest on the show, one of our podcast episodes, talking about red light therapy. He's the inventor of red light therapy for hair. So we're privileged to have him on the podcast. So he'll be presenting. We have other clinicians that will be presenting that also do hair therapies in their office. So they'll be talking about the modalities that we're using, like PRP, Derive, which is the stem cell therapy, talking a lot about inflammation, right? Inflammation oftentimes is leading the kill to the follicle. If the follicle gets inflamed, it's harder to get nutrients and hormones there, and it's more likely to shed. So we'll talk about inflammation and the role of inflammation. And we'll also be talking to a patient that has been through a lifelong journey of hair challenges and just get her perspective on aging as it relates to hair loss. So, hair loss can affect both men and women. Age is not a thing. We used to think it was just as we age, but we're seeing this in younger and younger people. And I say the earlier you treat, the better. And the mindset around treating is really important. It's not a one and done. None of these procedures are going to work for a lifetime if we're not taking care of business on the inside, right? They can definitely help restore. They can definitely turn the clock back about 5 years, which I really love. But it's that at-home therapy, that's the at-home self-care that's going to make the biggest difference in your long-term journey for full restoration.
Well, what an amazing commitment to a topic that is definitely studied, but I believe under talked about. And I just applaud you for bringing attention to it. And I hope that your podcast draws a lot of attention, and I look forward to sharing it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here. You have been the best security blanket I can ever imagine. And I couldn't imagine doing this with anybody else. So I appreciate you being here today and sharing your story and being so vulnerable. I saw those little tears well up in your eyes when you were talking about just the impact that it made. And I just appreciate you being here so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Well, this hair is partly, in fact, due to your relentless pursuit of finding things to make our hair be better. So thank you.
Thank you. So guys, thank you so much for being here. I hope this episode has blessed you as much as it has blessed me. Get ready for the future episodes as they come out. Please follow and share this podcast. Get the word out that there are options and hope. If it's important to you, it's important to me. And I'm glad you're here.
The Enhanced Wellness Living podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining professional advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.